few months ago, when the Bible study group was watching the Bonhoeffer video, a few of us, I think, realized that we had this treasure in our midst, in the person of George Megerle, who was an infant and then a young child in Nazi Germany during the war years, as early as 1939 and there through even beyond 1945. So we decided that we should try to, capture some of his memories, and we've done that. And again, you have a complete transcript of all of that. Let me begin with a meditation from Pastor Bonhoeffer, as we've been doing each Wednesday night, because we're reflecting on his insights into the cost of discipleship as we make the Lenten journey with Jesus toward Calvary. Bonhoeffer, who paid a substantial price, a significant price for his discipleship, would have us recognize that Christ really bids all of us come and die, that we're invited to come and die with him, to self, to the world, that we might be resurrected to new life in the kingdom. So I actually have started to use this resource. It's called I Want to Live These Days With You. It's a year of daily devotions drawn from many of Bonhoeffer's different writings. He wrote scores and scores of volumes. His most famous work, of course, is The Cost of Discipleship, also Life Together, Letters from Prison, a variety of works. But again, The Cost of Discipleship is the most important. But let me begin with this, and maybe we can use this to center our minds and calm our hearts. I certainly need that this evening. A love that is for us is the selection for today from this resource. I give you a new commandment, and here he is making reference to John 13:34. I give you a new commandment, says Jesus. That means that those who know him, know Jesus, must begin a new life with their neighbors, a life according to the commandment of Jesus. What is this new commandment? That you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. That's the direct quote from John 13. The love of Jesus Christ for us, what is that, Bonhoeffer asks. To us, is it only a word? And maybe it is. And if in fact that's the case, how tragic, how sad. Or have we experienced it? Have we experienced that? Only those who have experienced it can, in turn, love others with this love. Jesus' love, that is, love that comes from eternity and leads toward eternity, does not cling to temporal things, but surrounds us because we are supposed to be eternal. We're destined for eternity. We're eternal beings. That's how we're created. It lets nothing stop it, for it is God's eternal faithfulness to us. Jesus' love, that is, love that shrinks from no pain, no renunciation, no suffering, it helps the other person. It is the love with which he loved us solely for our own sake. He loved us not for his sake, but for our sake, and we are to love with that same love, with which on earth he took upon himself mockery and hatred and died on the cross. Jesus' love is love that takes upon itself the cross. Jesus' love that is for us as we are. As a mother loves her child as it is, and the greater the need, the greater the love, because she knows that the child requires her love. Such is the love of Jesus for us. He accepts us as we are, and then again would bid us love in that way here on earth as we anticipate eternity. With that in mind, let's begin with prayer, and then we'll get on to the evening's task. God in heaven, we thank you for your servant, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He is an inspiration to many of us. May we learn from his example. May we seek to emulate it. We certainly can't imitate it, but maybe aspire to it. And may we begin to love, maybe anew, with the love of Christ, the love to which Pastor Bonhoeffer invites us. A love that is not unlike the love of a mother for a child, the love that anticipates, that recognizes, that acknowledges the needs of the child, and then designs the love in response to that need, so that the love of the mother meets the need of the child. May we love our neighbors as Christ loves us. For your faithfulness to us in the person of Jesus Christ, Heavenly Father, we give you thanks. And for this evening, for those who have come to better understand the context in which Pastor Bonhoeffer lived and died in 1945, April 1945, better understand that context with the hope of our brother, our friend, George Megerle. Blessings on him, blessings on Judy, and thanks to all who have come this evening. Through Christ we pray. So, again, Bonhoeffer spent the last 2 years of his life in prison, arrested by the Nazis in 1943, and almost 2 years to the day in April of 1945, he was hanged. Very shortly thereafter, Hitler took his own life, and the Allies were able to liberate Germany. So George was there, as you'll hear, and we'll talk about that. Again, you have a complete transcript of this. First of all, my friend George, and he has become my friend over these last 6 months, and I'm glad to call you my friend. And we spent some really fun Friday afternoons. Yes, I see it. No, I see it, or I'll need it also, yeah. We spent some really fun Friday afternoons doing a bit of reminiscing about all of this. George is a scary, bright guy. He's really intelligent. A bachelor's degree from the University of Rochester, I believe, in chemical engineering first, and then the PhD in chemistry came later, and that was from SUNY State University of New York at Buffalo. Is that right? Yeah.
You forgot the honorary degree.
Yeah, let's hear about that.
Anybody can get.
Well, no, let's hear about the honorary degree.
Honorary degrees are generally given to people who are speakers at graduation. It's common that, well, for example, I believe Henry Kissinger, during his time in politics, acquired close to 60 honorary PhDs. Now, had he been a German and somebody in Germany and somebody would introduce him, technically they would have had to go through doctor about 60 times.
Yeah. Bright guy, yeah.
My neighbor is telling me to use the mic.
So you were born, you're a British citizen by birth, but found yourself as an infant in 1939 in Germany with your siblings, Carl, who was 4 years your senior, and Elizabeth, who was 8 years, I believe. Is that right? How did that happen? How did you wind up in Germany with your maternal grandparents?
It really involves my father and mother. Dad went to school in Esslingen. He obtained a electrical engineering degree during a hyperinflationary period subsequent to World War I. The German economy was in total shambles, and the reparations that had to be paid were designed to keep Germany extremely poor.
This was in the aftermath of World War I?
Yes, sir.
Right, okay.
And Keynesian economics says you borrow good money and you pay back cheap money. And that's happening to us now because we have inflation just like Germany had. Except Germany had it in spades. If you can picture me holding a piece of paper worth 1,000,000 marks, don't be surprised, because if I held paper that was worth much, much more. As a matter of fact, the economy pretty well degenerated into a barter economy. And to give you an example, my father acted as a watchman for an individual on the third floor of an apartment building. He was armed. He was told, shoot the pistol up in the air, and hopefully you'll scare people off. But one of the guys living in an adjacent room then would have time to escape via a window over adjoining roofs. My father claimed he never had to shoot the pistol because nobody ever came up to bother him. But it got him a free room during college. On weekends, students went out into the farm adjacent to Esslingen, and they would provide services to farmers doing whatever might be needed. That got them some meals on the weekends, and hopefully carrots, potatoes, and whatever else the farmer chose to give them. At the end of his college career, inflation was at its highest, and there were no jobs available. His solution was to try to come to the United States. And in those days, you had to have a sponsor. A sponsor became financially responsible for you. So he came to America, quickly got a job at Sun Electric after having stayed with his uncle for just a few weeks. He worked for Sun Electric for a fairly long period of time, built up some cash reserves, and decided that living the bachelor life was not that much fun. He had a girlfriend back in Esslingen and in Schondorf, the town that he was mostly raised in. So he took a leave of absence from his job, went back to Germany, married his girlfriend twice. First in a civil ceremony to get paperwork going, then in church. The church happened to be, at the time, the third largest Protestant cathedral in Germany. It had survived, among other things, the 30 Years' War between France and Germany, and still showed pockmarks from cannonballs on the rear of the church.
There's even a plaque there, I think you mentioned, right? There's a plaque there at the church calling attention to that, I believe. Yeah.
Anyway, his brother had been in a managerial position in a company called WWII Aktiengesellschaft, WWII Corporation. And he suggested to Dad that he might wish to explore a bankrupt American company called WWII. They had one chemical product and electrical apparatus to heat curlers. This is pre-permanent waves. So he looked at the project and decided, yeah, he'd give it a try. Mom was responsible for cooking up the liquid part of the business. Dad responsible for sales, for everything else, including the redesign of the electrical equipment. And they managed to pay back all of its debts and ended up with a company that was totally in their hands, not doing very well. they had to rely and could rely on some of their relatives to provide some of the labor. In particular, the daughter of the man who had sponsored his trip to America. I don't know who got lonesome for the old country, but they went back to Germany for a visit, and my uncle again suggested that hey, you might wish to start a similar company in Great Britain. So he explored that possibility and did so, but he had to start it in an economically depressed area. He chose an area near Basingstoke in Wales. He brought his wife and 2 children at that point to Wales, and sometime later, the bad apple came along. Troublemaker, I should say.
So Elizabeth first, and then Carl,
Yes.
and then George. Okay.
And at that point, Elizabeth was about 8 years older, Carl about 4 years older, and I was a newborn. Well, since Mom had been doing a lot of work for the company, and because Dad felt he had to come back to America to check on the American company, they planned a trip for the 2 of them to include the World's Fair in Flushing Meadow. But you don't want 3 little kids along, particularly a newborn. So they parked us with maternal grandparents in Schondorf, the town they both had been brought up in, and left for America. In a way, they really lucked out, because Hitler had first started, or Germany had first started, submarine activity in the Atlantic Ocean. And then, for one reason or another, they stopped sinking passenger ships. When they returned to America via ship, they had no difficulties. But then shortly thereafter, the war started. Now here are 2 German citizens running an American company with 3 kids, 2 Americans and a Brit in Germany. He approached the State Department and said, what do we do? And the consensus was that it was too dangerous to bring the kids to America. There was nobody in Great Britain who could take care of us. So keep the kids with Grandma and Grandpa. The war's going to be over anyway in very short order.
That was the conventional wisdom, right? That Hitler would not last long.
The conventional wisdom was based on the fact that Germany had virtually no fuel. They had virtually no explosives, no nitrates during World War I. But chemists figured out how to make the stuff. In World War II, they lacked gasoline, aviation fuel, and everything else. And the chemists again went to work. Germany had plenty of hydroelectric power, plenty of coal, plenty of limestone. Coal, limestone, and electricity makes calcium carbide. That's the lamp that the flame that miners have on their hats. Calcium carbide with the right catalyst under the right temperature and pressure conditions converts to benzene. Benzene is approximately 100 octane fuel. In other words, you can fly airplanes, you can drive trucks or tanks. But there was one other sort of ace in the hole. And Hitler and his generals knew that there was plenty of oil in what's now southern Ukraine. One of the reasons Russia is so interested in that area. The oil was being pumped mostly by American companies, particularly a guy by the name of Rockefeller. And would make the conquest of that area even more interesting was the fact that the population of Ukraine was mostly Germanic. It was virtually an unpopulated region under Russian rule. And Catherine the Great imported German peasants to begin populating Ukraine. So I don't think the Germans felt that there was going to be a great deal of resistance to them taking the oil fields in Ukraine. By then, Germany had signed a non-aggression pact with Joe Stalin, and when Germany decided that, hey, it's time to take Poland, their armies came from one direction, the Russian armies came from the other, and Poland ended up divided. Anyhow, back to my family. My family was really quite split. My mother's sister had come to America in a church-sponsored group and refused to return to Germany. My father's uncle had come well before World War I and established himself here. I had two more uncles, one I never met. My father's brother-in-law served in the German army on the Russian front. He was captured, sent to Siberia as slave labor, and returned to Germany as a broken man in the late 1950s.
1950.
My mother's brother served in the German army, again on the Russian front. And he never wanted to talk to me about it. But I must have been a sneaky kid, because one day when my uncle and his wife and my parents were talking, I snuck downstairs, kind of hid, and I heard the conversation, and I knew enough German to follow it. That uncle, during the retreat from St. Petersburg and Moscow, was with a division of men totaling about 5,000. Of the 5,000, less than 100 made it home.
Less than 100 returned out of 5,000.
He was then assigned to the Western Front and captured by the French. He didn't like the French much, but, you know, prisoner of war camps are fun places to be.
So could you tell us about Schorndorf? I don't, my German's terrible, so I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but it was close to Stuttgart, is that correct?
Schorndorf is about 30 kilometers away from Stuttgart.
But a farming community?
The community had virtually no industry. At one point, they made those nice red roofing tiles when you see pictures of Germany, but they ran out of clay. So that industry went. They also made iron bedsteads, and other people could make it cheaper, so that they
That was the end of that.
basically a a farming community. Their vineyards dated back to Roman times. And they had vineyards well before the Romans captured that part of what later became Germany. At least that's what the archaeology departments told them.
So your grandparents were essentially farmers then, is that correct?
My grandfather, for the most part, was a vintner.
A vintner, okay.
He had, I guess, the knack of making good wine. He managed to pay his taxes in wine, and he tithed to the local church in wine. The rest he could either drink or sell.
Tell us about the church. Your recollections of that really were interesting to me. The third largest German Protestant cathedral.
Protestant cathedral in
Okay.
Germany.
Okay.
Schondorf was a fortified town, and it honored in particular a group of German women. There was a painting at the back of town hall. It's now, I believe, a mosaic. And that painting was the result of French occupying forces being thrown out of town by the women of Schondorf using pitchforks, scythes, kitchen knives, whatever.
These were pretty tough women, huh?
Well, all of the men were off defending Stuttgart.
Yeah, okay.
And the reason they were off is because the French said, unless you surrender Schondorf, we will burn Stuttgart to the ground.
So your town wasn't really the site of much bombing, but you did come by a couple of bombs, I understand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and at least two, and you got up close and personal with at least one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me finish.
Sure.
Why there's great animosity, at least in that section of the country, towards the French. Obviously, Napoleon, on the way to Russia, went through Germany. The 30 Years' War decimated that part of Germany. And the fact that the French said, we will burn Stuttgart unless you surrender the town. The town didn't have much choice because virtually all of the fighting men were already in Stuttgart to defend it. That was the location of the local royalty. So needless to say, Schondorf was surrendered. But the French burned Stuttgart anyway. Got the women a little bit annoyed.
Okay.
Okay. Second World War. Now what can a newborn kid, or even a 1, 2, or 3-year-old kid tell you about the war? Well, there were food shortages. Some things were totally unavailable. For example, sugar. But that was no problem, at least not for me, because I never tasted sugar. And I didn't until after 1945. My grandfather, being a farmer, being a vintner, had plenty of wine which he could trade. He had orchards. He leased fields to grow potatoes and wheat. And in those days, your lease involved a percentage of the crop. You didn't need cash to lease property. So we ate pretty well, along with the kitchen garden out in the back. We were pretty well left alone. There was only one major problem. Major problem was the SS happened to be in Schondorf. And Schondorf contained a number of warehouses where military stores, mostly food, was stored. The locals didn't know that. Not until 1945, when the SS dynamited the bridge over the Rems River, which kept farmers from their fields and the vineyards on the other side. But they did something very stupid. The dynamiting of that bridge probably slowed the American army by maybe 5 minutes, because underneath, below, and above the bridge, they had built a concrete spillway. Water was probably no more than 8 inches deep, and when the Americans came, down one bank, across the spillway, up the other bank. First American soldiers were actually black troops, huge guys, fully armed, filthy dirty. They'd been doing some major fighting, and they blew right through the town. The American army came later, not much later. But you could tell that the population had already quit. There were white bed sheets hanging from virtually every house in town. The bombing in Schondorf involved 2 bombs. The fields around Schondorf were pockmarked with bomb craters. And that was because bombing occurred, a lot of it occurred with time bombs. And if a bomber got delayed, the bombardier had to drop those bombs. And the fields around Schondorf were a good place to do it. Virtually nobody got hurt. 2 bombs hit the town. One of them went through the church roof, through the baptistry, and ended up in the basement. It was probably a time bomb because it did not explode. The second one hit the railroad station waiting room, buried itself in the floor. It was a time bomb. It was diffused, but the German army wasn't around to take it away, so they posted a soldier next to it. And the next day, all of the kids in town got to sit on probably a 500-pound bomb. Me too.
Quite a bit larger than you, but
yeah.
yeah. And you said the guard was a nice guy. I remember you telling
Well,
me.
the guards knew, or the guard knew, that it was diffused, and it wasn't going to be any problem to anybody.
Yeah. You told a story to me also about, I believe it was a watchman. You were out gathering some coal, right? You would look for fragments of coal, and this watchman, I mean, the way I understood the story, had a bit of compassion for the situation in which your family found itself.
Yeah, you have to understand that coal was necessary for the war effort. Made gasoline, created electricity. You needed to make steel. And consequently, the German population was very shy on fuel. Most of the surrounding land, particularly the forest, was state-owned. My grandfather, in his spare time, was given a uniform, dark green, and during his spare time, he was assigned to patrol the forest to make sure that nobody was stealing any federal wood.
That was state property then.
That was state property. So you, by the way, the Americans didn't realize that his forestry uniform was not a military uniform. They took him into custody for a short while, but he had learned enough to say, "I Americano," which the American Army people understood as 3 Americans. And he brought them to his house, and they saw 3 little kids, one of which could speak fairly decent, my older sister.
That was Elizabeth, okay.
Could speak fairly decent English. So he got off scot-free, although he took his uniform and got rid of it, because he didn't want to go through that again.
Soldiers never entered the house, I believe you said.
Well, yeah. At the end of the war, what most people don't know is that Germany was declared an open town, city, country. American soldiers had 3 days to confiscate anything that could be used in the war effort. Binoculars, telescopes. You could stab soldiers with your steak knife, your carving knife. Your carving fork had tines about this long. You could stab people with that. So that was confiscated. And if you had good knives, good silverware, you took the knives. But what good is silverware without a knife? So you took everything. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I worked with a gentleman who was one of the ones who liberated a whole bunch of stuff. He was a stamp collector, but also was fluent in German and acted as a translator. He was responsible for blowing the doors on post office safes. And he sent German postal material back to his mother in the New York City area. He also liberated chemistry labs. Platinum Crucible paid for 3 days leave in Paris. He liberated engineering labs, and I have had one piece, a planimeter. Anybody know what that is? It's an instrument that follows a curve on a graph, which permits you to calculate the area under that graph. My son now owns it. I bought that from him. He also brought in a bunch of trophies from a yachting club. Small little sailboats, silver trophies, a couple of inches high, with the name of the yacht club, the logo, the year, and the name of the winner. I wanted to buy them from him. He asked me what I was going to do, and I said, I'm going to return them, because that shouldn't have been confiscated. He refused to sell them to me. He had them sold as scrap silver. He was quite a good stamp collector, in particular German hand overprint stamps. I was one of the people who bought the stamps that were stolen by the Postal Museum director in East Germany when he defected.
We talked a lot about how the news was managed, so that morale stayed relatively high among the populace, and disinformation, I think, maybe came into play a bit.
Um, I was lucky enough to acquire a English translation of Goebbels' diaries. Fascinating reading, mostly because he controlled not only the German press, but also had corralled the foreign press into one small area and fed them what he wanted them to report on. Newspapers, pretty well unheard of. They were very small, very regional. You didn't subscribe to them. You had a roughly 3-foot diameter cement pylon, little overhanging roof, with this thing about maybe at best 8 feet tall. And a copy of the newspapers was glued onto it so that you could read what was going on. And Dr. Goebbels was quite smart. One of the things that people were interested in was the one article titled Gefallen, translation, fallen, in other words, died. He kept the newspapers very regional so that the list of dead would be minimal. You didn't hear what was happening 20 miles away. You only heard about what happened in a sort of 10-kilometer area.
So morale remained high for a time. You said a turning point was the Russian front, I guess, and at that point,
the Russian front was a disaster, a total disaster for the Germans. First of all, the Russians practiced scorched earth policy. They evacuated their citizens, told them what they could grab onto a car, either drawn by cattle or horses, or pushed and pulled by humans, and just head towards the interior of Russia. So the Germans had relatively little to scrounge when they first invaded Russia. That meant they had a rather large supply problem. And they also overestimated the speed of their army. Much of the German army froze to death. Mostly because they didn't have winter clothing during the Russian campaign.
And that was a brutal winter, right? I mean,
Yeah.
On the Russian front.
But as everybody knows, when the Russian counteroffensive came, the retreat was rapid as can be, because nobody wanted to be captured by the Russians. And the reason is quite simple. It didn't matter to a peasant who lost his farmhouse, his barn, his animals, why he lost them. It was the Germans' fault, because they invaded, and they weren't going to treat the Germans very kindly. One of the reasons why so few of German soldiers, they lost about 1 million men outside of Moscow and Stalingrad.
Wonder if you could tell me a few of the anecdotes that I really enjoyed the most. You told us about the large bomb, but you would do some scavenging out in the field for the spent cartridges from the machine, I guess the aircraft machine gun?
Yeah,
machine
I
guns?
think a couple of stories are appropriate.
Made some belts, I believe.
Schondorf was a very small railroad, had a very small railroad yard, but there was sufficient room to park a couple of railroad trains in the side-going tracks. The first thing I noticed when I was sent out to collect coal was a 3-story house on the other side of the tracks, which had been machine gunned like you wouldn't believe. There wasn't a window intact or roofing tile intact, and virtually every foot or so, you had a bullet hole in the walls.
From strafing runs? Is that what that was from? Okay.
Strafing runs were pretty well limited to the railroad yard because the ammunition that the planes carried could knock holes in the boilers of the smaller German railroad engines. So the town, or part of the town, was strafed extensively.
But those spent cartridges then were
Well,
really useful, huh?
kids were sent out because the coal trains that came through that town, well, again, you have to remember back, this is years ago, railroad tracks weren't welded. They were of a certain length, basically nailed down with plates. And in the winter, they contracted. In the summer, they expanded. In the summer, you got very little of the clackety-clack. In the winter, you had quite a bit of vibration when that railroad car went over it. And because transportation was at a premium, the Germans overloaded their coal cars. Naturally, some of the coal fell off. Kids took buckets and collected it. I was about 5 years old when I first got to collect. And at one point, all the little kids disappeared, and I was wondering, what the heck is going on? They disappeared because a railroad watchman showed up.
And it was just the two of you suddenly. Yeah.
Yep. He kind of picked me up by the scruff of my neck, looked in my bucket, and told me I was stealing from the Third Reich. And if I continued to do that, I would be arrested and go to jail. So don't ever come back and steal coal. He then walked over to a hopper car, pulled the lever, and dumped a pile of coal about 2 feet high in the width of the railroad tracks, and left. Kids came back, filled their buckets, and I figured if these kids can steal, so can I.
And your grandmother had coal to cook
Well,
with and heat with?
She didn't have a full bucket because I couldn't carry a full bucket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My grandmother, well, my grandfather was a softie. My grandmother was a really tough old German lady. And when you think of German ladies, you probably think of, hey, they were great cooks, not grandma. Number one, German stoves and ovens didn't have temperature gauges. You kind of had to guess the temperature. The old recipes say medium cool, medium, and hot oven. We kind of figured out a hot oven was probably 300 to 350 degrees, and the others were about 50 degrees lower each. My grandmother was given a bunch of fish one day, carp, out of the Rems River, which ran next to the town. She had never cooked fish before. Well, she knew enough that the skin was not going to be edible because it hadn't been scaled. And she put it on a pan in the oven and baked it. The Lord knows how long, maybe 2 hours, I don't know. But when the fish came out of the oven and you went to eat it, you stabbed it with your fork and it shattered. Well done.
Well, yeah.
After the war, my parents began to send care packages. One of the care packages, the first care packages, actually contained things like sugar and coffee and specialty stuff which they knew the civilian population couldn't get. One of the later care packages included something for the kids, a package of lime jello. Now picture a lady who cannot read English and a kid who hasn't spoken English for the most part in 5, 6 years, trying to translate the directions. You know what the directions are. You take a certain number of cups of water. Problem number 1, German cups aren't American cups. Problem number 2 was grandmother decided that water wasn't that healthy. So maybe she should use milk. Specifically goat's milk.
Mm.
Now my grandfather's goats, both males and females, were stabled in the same barn.
Billy and Nanny together.
And, goat's milk was rather odoriferous. Come to think of it, neither my brother or sister cared to drink it. I did, too stupid to know better.
So we've all heard the expression of a man without a country. You
Well,
literally were. You're going to get to that. Okay.
I'll get to
Yeah, great.
To finish with my grandmother,
Okay.
she heated up the goat's milk, like the directions say, poured in the jello, and got this fairly dark green liquid and very light green curds. Make a long story short, the kids ate it anyway. It was sweet. I didn't know enough to put a nose clip up.
That would have been
I
helpful.
clipped my
Yeah.
nose.
So after the war, where were you to go? Or that was an open question.
During that 3-day open period, 2 soldiers showed up. One whose name will always be in at least my memory. His name was Philip Wanroy. Not that I was introduced, but they knocked on the door. One of the soldiers carried loot. Phil Wanroy had a rifle at the ready because he didn't know what was going to happen and who lived there. He addressed grandmother in English. It was kind of useless. So grandmother called my sister Elizabeth, who managed to translate. she told Mr. Wanroy that there were two American kids, she and her younger brother, and a Brit, me. Phil Wanroy wrote his sister a letter saying that he and a friend had come across 3 foreign kids. His sister managed to trace my parents, because Phil had said they used to live on Staten Island, and she managed to write a letter and get it to my parents, which told them that their 3 kids were okay.
Because they really did not know. They had no idea whether you were alive
Not
or
even
not.
the Swiss embassy.
Okay.
My parents tried, could tell them whether we were living or dead.
Mm.
No mail out of Germany. And Swiss weren't particularly liked either, so their presence in Germany was minimal.
Well, we're pretty well at the end of the hour, but as you think back now on this experience, I guess, how has that shaped your life, and what lessons have you, sort of brought away from that as you think back over it, and anything that you could leave with us in terms of, how to live life
One
well?
of the things that being in Germany as a foreigner made me think about is what really happened in Germany. Because by the time I came to America in late 1947, and I guess I should tell you why, American troops were stationed in Great Britain. Great Britain lost a lot of men, and a lot of girls fell in love with American soldiers. The immigration quota for Great Britain exceeded 2 years. So there was no way a Brit could make that quota, not for a number of years. My brother and sister, being Americans, could have left immediately, but my parents chose to keep us together. I had a choice, stay a Brit, and having lived in Germany as a minor for a long enough period of time, I could have been declared a German. But that would have been really dumb. German immigration quotas were also quite long. Think of concentration camps being emptied. Think of machinists. Think of von Braun and a couple of hundred rocket scientists. All came to America. Everybody wanted to come to the land of opportunity, where one of the people I got to meet over here described America as the land with gold on the streets. He became a successful businessman. I finally managed to get to the United States because I was declared a man without a country. Now, unfortunately, you cannot, in those days, you could not renounce British citizenship, nor did America provide dual citizenship with Great Britain. And jumping ahead a number of years, I took a cousin who came for a visit, who wanted to see Niagara Falls. So I stopped at immigration and checked that he had a multiple entry visa. Took him over to Niagara Falls, Canada. And on the way back, where were you born? Well, my cousin had papers. I let my cousin and my car back. And to me, they said, out of the car. I happen to have the precursor of a green card. And when he looked at that, he said, that's not valid anymore. I said, well, I can show you my UB identity card.
Because by then you were at the university.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
I was a graduate student.
Graduate student.
That really didn't go over too well either. And I said, well, you can call my wife and she'll tell you I got a kid living in Cheektowaga, New York. And the guy finally said, get out of here. But don't ever try to cross the border without the proper papers. And that too created a rather large problem. Because by then, not only had my parents become citizens, they had to submit their marriage certificate. And the powers that be lost their application.
Now, there were two certificates, right? Is that,
Yeah.
do I remember? Okay.
So when I told my father I needed his marriage certificate, his answer was, no, you can't have it. It's the only one I have. And I said, well, in that case, I can't become a citizen. So he actually called his lawyer. And his lawyer arranged a hearing with a court in Hackensack, New Jersey, where I was questioned, how long have you been here? When did you start school? What are you doing now? And I told him I started back in 8th grade, and I was now working toward a PhD. And he said, well, your parents married. And my dad's lawyer reached in his pocket, unfolded a German church wedding certificate. That judge didn't read German. But he addressed the lawyer addressed the judge and said, Your Honor, I was told not to let this out of my hand because you guys lost the civil certificate. The judge kind of laughed, said, put it away, and said, you, raise your right hand, gave me the oath.
And that's how you became
And
a
that's
U.S.
how I
citizen.
became an American citizen. And technically, I'm still also a British citizen, because you couldn't renounce that. I think my wife probably has told a number of people that when I first was put into grade school, and there were 2 grade schools in Tenafly, New Jersey, that there was a Nazi kid in the other school.
That was the rumor.
Yep. And obviously, the kid could only speak German, was the Nazi kid. My parents had a unique way of teaching me German. My mother made some flashcards. German was forbidden Monday through Saturday. I could only speak German on Sundays. So you learned. Quickly, the school actually assigned a kid to me to sort of take me by my hand and bring me to the lunchroom and outside for play or whatever.
Well, as we finish then this evening, any final thoughts? Anything you'd like to leave with us? Maybe, about Bonhoeffer or the Confessing Church or the
Well, you have
the
to
resistance?
keep in mind that the Germans literally annihilated more than just, or tried to annihilate more than just the Jewish people. They did a pretty good job in terms of the Jewish populations. But they also wiped out the people who lived in sort of dead-end valleys in Austria and in Germany, because most of those people had intermarried for too many years. They too disappeared. If a minister opened his mouth and said something political during the war years, hundreds, thousands probably ended up in concentration camps and probably also didn't make it. My concern as I learned more about the Second World War was, where is the American anger with what happened in Japan, with what happened in Indonesia, with Pol Pot? Where was the anger when the Russians annihilated the officer and junior officer corps of the Polish army? They machine gunned close to 10,000.
These were other mass exterminations,
Yep.
yeah.
And what about all those people who ended up in the gulags in Siberia? You never heard much about them. And you can probably guess why.
So we're selective in how we
Oh, yeah.
become
And
indignant.
remember one thing, the winners write
Write
the
the
history
history.
books.
Yeah.
That's also one of the reasons I gave all my World War II memorabilia to my son, so that maybe he could tell his kids that war really isn't a very good thing.
Well, thank you for bringing that message here for us this evening, and giving us context as we'll be reading Bonhoeffer a bit more these next 2 weeks. So we'll have a better understanding now of the world in which he lived and where he ultimately died as someone resisting.
I mean, kids as young as 16 in the Hitlerjugend were encouraged to report anti-German conversations their parents might have had. They did.
Yeah, I love the way you explained that to me. Is you were pretty much excluded from those conversations so that you would never have anything to report.
My
that-
grandfather and grandmother and his brother and their family never discussed politics in front of the kids.
Probably for a good reason. Yeah. So, well, let's thank George for being here this evening. Thank you. Appreciate it very much. And we're gonna call it a night. 2 more Wednesday nights, and we'll reflect each Wednesday night on a brief passage from The Cost of Discipleship. So, having watched the movie for 2 Wednesday evenings, having George here this evening to give us some context about Germany during the war years, then we'll spend 2 more weeks reading just a bit of Bonhoeffer's writings as those were penned during his imprisonment from 43 to 45. So, maybe you can join us the next 2 Wednesday nights. Yeah.
Sorry about the runny nose and the breaking up. It's thanks to not to what I told you. I made the mistake of getting a COVID vaccine and ended up with myasthenia gravis thanks to it.
Yeah.
And the medicine I take makes my mouth water at the wrong time, makes my nose run at the wrong time.
Well, we appreciate